Hello Internet, welcome back to our experimental Cataclysm series. If you don't know, this is the show where we discuss some of the changes that have come to the experimental version of Cataclysm over the last couple of weeks. There's some stuff to talk about, some stuff that's pretty interesting, and some stuff that's pretty minor, but I wanted to shout them out anyway. We do have a new monster this week, so if you don't want spoilers, you're going to have to check the descriptions down below for the various timestamps if you want to avoid anything in particular. Whenever there's a new monster, I typically don't name the monster in the description. I'll just put new monster. That way, no spoilers. But this is a spoiler show, so, it is what it is. Take it as you will. First and foremost, I want to touch briefly. I have a new microphone. I know some of you don't watch the other content. You only come for these videos. It's a new mic. I like it. It helps me. I can run a fan in the background now, which is very helpful when it's like today and it's about 82 degrees outside. There are some issues with the mic. Primarily, the issues are actually with myself. There are issues with me not understanding the technology and with my throat and mouth sounds and all that gross stuff. That's more of a problem with my disgusting human, body rather than the actual mic itself. So you're just going to have to deal with it. So let's jump into it. First, from Jeremy, we got a new wrapper for protein bars. So if you've been to the evac shelter in the last couple of months, the newer layouts of the evac shelter, you've seen that there are tons of protein bars there, and they had the pretty standard, I think they came in paper wrappers. I'm not really sure off the top of my head. I never really bothered with them because they're not very satisfying. Like, yes, they have calories and whatnot, but I'm more of a go get my own food kind of guy rather than have it handed to me. Anyway, we saw this in our recent playthrough. It's got a little description on it and stuff, and I just thought it was interesting because for like a long time, containers in this game have been limited to plastic bags, cardboard boxes, etc. And I would like to see more things having their own kind of style of wrapper, because those bags typically don't make a lot of sense. Like, okay, every vending machine that has pork sticks, they come in a plastic bag. Well, every machine that has bacon in it comes in a plastic bag. Everything that has, and it's the same containers over and over and over. I do like things like this, especially with a protein bar like this, or with MREs, you would anticipate that they would have their own, different wrapping rather than just being, oh, it's a plastic bag, oh, it's a whatever. So I know it's a very, very minor change that probably a lot of people don't care about. Power sauce. Isn't that Homer makes spaghetti into a bar? I don't remember, actually. But regardless, I know it's innocuous and pretty small, but I wanted to give it a shout out because I think it's pretty neat. In fact, I should expand my zoom in a little bit for you mobile users. Anyway, let's move on. Next, from Code Bandit, we have a new challenge scenario called Fungal Infected. It is what it is. I mean, it's really straightforward. It doesn't add new locations or anything like that. As far as I know, it's just a straightforward new scenario. I actually looked at this yesterday for a video I was making, and the way I read it was that it's basically the regular game, except you start with a fungal infection, which is, not an easy thing to deal with necessarily. It can be pretty hard to find antifungals, but not really something I'm super interested in, but I wanted to give it a shout out. I usually try to shout out new scenarios. They're one of the things that excites me the most. When I see changes, I really like new scenarios, so thought I'd give it a shout out. Next, from Levian Fiend, we have some random charges for single-use storage. Specific use storage? I don't remember. But basically, if you've been in a house, you've seen those junk drawers, right, with the batteries, the strings, etc., etc. That's an example of one of these sus containers. So this is just to make their the charges of those items have a variable amount to them. So like previously, if you found something with a battery, it was always going to be either fully charged or not charged at all. This is a step to make them more random, more sensible, so it's not always perfect. I'm not sure what all was touched in this. I think I saw at least one other PR that did something similar. So This is something that is happening. So here, permanent marker, rather than having whatever the standard charges were, you can now see it can have a minimum of 50 charges. Candle, same thing. You can see it has a charges min set of 10. So this will just lead to a little bit more of a random nature. You'll see detergent looks like it can be anywhere from 1 charge to 40 charges. Milk, interestingly as well. I mean, so you know, it's just going to add more variable amounts, so it's not always the same static numbers over and over and over. And I think this is a good change. We saw this with bleach and ammonia not that long ago. Used to be you would always find a crap ton of bleach, and now it's more of a random assortment how much bleach you will find in any given container. And you know, again, it's simple, but I like it, and and it adds diversity, and it makes the world feel more real. Obviously, most people don't have a full or empty jug of bleach in their kitchen. It's somewhere in the middle. Anyway, moving on, I wanted to shout out Curse Twist again because I've noticed, one, they've been doing a lot of work. We'll touch later on their work with the mall, but they've also been doing a lot with houses, and currently it seems like they're trying to mainline the Fuji Structures mod. So I just picked this random PR. There have been quite a few mainlining various locations, houses. This one is a game store, etc. And it's not just mainlining them, it is updating them. So here we have a picture of the game shop before. Looks like decks of cards, a couple, are those books? I assume that they're books. No idea what this thing is. Obviously a non-tile thing over here. Looks like just a generic, like, I guess tabletop gaming type shop. They have a little area, maybe like D&D and gaming in the back, sitting out here, etc. So that's, I think, what the game store means. And you'll see there's no vehicles, the loot is very sparse, etc. If we scroll down, they've actually updated this location. So not only is it more stuff, you can see the shelving units and whatnot are much more full than they were in the previous one. They've also updated to add vehicles and things like that. So obviously the game has been moving for a long time now to up the amount of loot that you will find in various locations. So, oh, and a bloody sink. That's interesting. So you can see, you know, that these things are not just getting imported, they're also getting updated. And this happens every now and then where they'll start mainstreaming certain mods. You know, they mainlined the boats mod when waterways got updated because it was a natural thing to do. Curse Twist has been doing some work with houses. Again, the basements we've talked about. They're doing some stuff with the mall. So they seem to do a lot of structure stuff. So kind of makes sense if they're adding houses to the game that they might mainline a bunch of houses from mods and things. So pretty neat. Wanted to shout that out. Next, from Ramza13. I am a little bit confused about this PR, but I will talk about what I've seen of it. So basically, just going off what the PR says, it adds penalties for gorging and Jason control of hunger penalties. So what that means is that they've made it possible to add and remove effects from hunger, various stages of hunger in Jason, which is a good thing. Anything that Jasonizes puts more stuff in the hands of modders, which in my opinion is a very good thing. And it adds penalties for overeating, and now all levels of hunger have an effect that can be edited to change hunger penalties. Now, I don't really know. They also reference at some point in here about a delay between consumption and actual effect. And that's my experience with it. So I don't 100% understand the PR, of course, other than what they've told me in the description. But in my experience already playing with this, what seems to happen is that I get engorged really easily because the consume menu up in the upper left corner of the consume menu. Let me pull up the game. So first, I apologize for the smallness of this. Normally, I have this basically enlarged for mobile users, but I don't have that set up at the moment. So if we go into the Eat menu, you'll see in the upper left corner we have this notation that tells us what our current status is. What I've been experiencing is that this does not connect to this correctly. It seems like if I eat, my character will say, okay, it will say satisfied. I'll exit this menu and it will immediately say full, and then I'll take a step and it will go from full to engorged. So I believe that there is a it's a short delay, And because it's so short, I don't fully understand the need for a delay at all. Because I consume something, it says I'm satisfied, so I'm like, okay, I can stop eating. I back out, I'm full, then I'm engorged, and then, maybe 10 turns later, my character vomits. And I become, hungry again or whatever. I don't understand the need for such a small delay, because all it does in my experience is basically I eat, and the message I get, which I take as an indicator I can stop eating, is delayed. So after eating, I am immediately engorged. And I'm a little frustrated by this because I use this menu. Like, that's the reason this is displayed here, is because this does not update until you exit this menu. So the reason that food and drink are displayed here is so that you have a quick reference to know how much you've eaten and drunk, because when you back out, this will update once you leave this menu. So if we're going to be using this as the quality of life that it was intended for, then it needs to reflect, like, I need to understand that if I'm eating something and I go up to full, my character's not actually going to be full necessarily. It's on such a slight... I just don't understand it. So I'm having a little bit of trouble explaining what my issue with this is. But I'm pretty displeased when I eat some food, back out, and then my character becomes engorged, and, then I start reading a book or whatever, and my character vomits on the floor. I just don't find that satisfying. I don't want to eat to the point of engorged. I'm, roleplay-ish, so I do try to keep my character satisfied. But with the rebranding of some of the terms, the names going from, they removed peckish and some of those other things, I'm just a little confused as to why my character always ends up engorged when these menus don't reflect that. Does that all make... I hope that makes sense. I don't know if it does or not. So let's just move on, because I don't know if I'm making any sense. Next from Korg, we got item length. You may have noticed this pop up. It basically adds a length to items. Pretty straightforward. This is the initial implementation. A lot of items do not have proper length set. I believe we were working with, what are they? Not plywood. What's it called in the game? Wood panels in our tutorial Let's Play, and we discovered that those are 5 inches long, which is probably not correct, given that they're, big plywood sheets from tables and things. So this is the initial implementation. It's not on everything. It's not accurate on everything. That will get hammered out over time. So if you find an item that has a ridiculous length, I mean, hey, if you want to contribute, go ahead and maybe, edit that and put in a proper length. That would be great, would be my assumption, is that they would welcome that very much, because that's less work for them to do. But you're going to start noticing it popping up on items. This is going to connect to containers, would be my assumption. So that's something of a particular length. It has to be able to fit within the confines of the actual container. And it makes sense that things would have a length attached to them. This has led to some issues. I've seen some people complaining about holsters not being able to holster certain items, and I believe that that's connected, from what I've heard, to item length, but I don't really know how that works. I've just heard some people say that is the culprit, so I don't really know, beyond initial implementation, what has been done with this, or what's necessarily his intention from here. But I do think it's good, because anything that builds more of that stuff lets us have a little bit more granularity, right? Because we can specify, like, again, specifically for containers, item length interacts with the size of a container to determine whether or not something can be held in a container. So to me, it makes perfect sense. And the more technical that kind of stuff gets, the more refined the systems will be. So I'm overall pretty pleased to see that. Next, from Testudo Cultu, we have allow cranes to lift corpses for full butchery, and allow chains to be used to hang corpses from trees. Pretty much exactly what it says. Previously, if you're not familiar with the butchering system, to full butcher, you'll need a rope and a tree, or a metal butchering rack, that kind of stuff, in order to full butcher large corpses. This allows you to hang them from a crane, which makes sense. That's something that, I guess hunters do primarily just haul them up in a tree or whatever, but I've definitely seen people butchering animals on what is essentially a crane with some chain hanging from it. So I think this is a nice thing because it enables more full butchering, basically is what it comes down to. So it also, I believe, metal chains. I mean, I don't know if this uses metal chains specifically, but chains are some of the least useful items in the game. They really don't work for much. So it's nice to see them get a little bit of value of some sort. Because I can't think of anything else that I ever used chains for. So that's cool. So yeah, I just wanted to shout this out. Pretty small change, but I thought it was cool. Okay, next we need to talk about bullet damage. So from another simulacrum, we have a bullet damage being introduced into the game. Now this was two separate PRs. I don't remember what the other one does. It will be linked down below. But I wanted to shout this out because I actually missed this. This appears to have been merged almost a month ago, and I didn't really even notice this when it happened. I don't think we talked about it because this all seems like news to me. So previously in the game, there was no bullet type damage. So damage in Cataclysm is separated into multiple types. Bullet or impact or whatever you want to call, I mean, it's specifically referred to as ballistic, I believe, and bullet in this PR. So that is what you'll be seeing on items. You will see ballistic listed as a protection type. Previously, you know, you would see cut, bash, what was the other? Acid, fire. I feel like there was one more and I can't remember it. And now it will have ballistic as well. This is really, really great. I think that this is fantastic. One of the issues we've had with the ESAPI vest is that it was intended to be bullet resistant, but there was no system in place to make it bullet resistant without also ramping up its other protection values. So, and we're going to talk about this kind of conceptually. Let's jump here quick to Ember's thing here. They've added EOD gear to the game and reworked Kevlar and some other things. EOD gear is similar to the ESAPI vest. It's a lot of high protection items, and they have a really high ballistic protection. These are probably some of the only items in the game currently that have ballistic protection assigned to them. Kevin said that the current ballistic values are placeholders. They're not actually balanced. There's no system in place to really decide how much protection, ballistic protection, something should have. But I wanted to talk about these things being added to the game, and now let's talk about it conceptually. So what does this really mean? Basically, so currently, what's a good example? Okay, we have bash damage in Cataclysm. Now let's say for some reason in the old game, bash damage and acid resistance were the same value. They were all based off of your bash damage. So in order for something to have acid protection, it had to have a really high bash value. So the game would go and it would take things like, I don't know, a pair of rubber gloves, right? And it would set, in order to make it acid resistant, it would have to have a high bash protection, but it wouldn't make sense for that to also have a high bash protection because they're thin rubber gloves. And so what you would end up with is acid resistance gear would have very high bash protection, even though a lot of them are thin and would not actually protect you very well against bash damage. Hopefully that makes sense. That's what we were experiencing with ballistic. In order to make something bullet resistant, they had to crank up the cut and stab damage or stab protection so high that it was resistant to a lot of different kinds of attacks, even though you were trying to make it resistant to ballistic damage. Does that all make sense? One of the reasons I had such an issue with the ballistic ESAPI vests that were added to the game is because they were so powerful against cut, bash, and bullets, right? It was just too much protection for what is basically, it's a vest, right? And I always had issue with that. And it did not compare well to other armor in the game. It was way, way too powerful when compared to those things. And it stood alone. It was the only item in the game that was like that. That was just some random piece of, non-power armor that had these ridiculous values. And when they implemented that, instead of rebalancing all the other items and reworking, the armor system and what these values are supposed to be, they just slapped together this vest, and it stood out. It was an aberration, and I really, really hated it. And now what we're going to see, I believe, is a rebalancing of those sort of armors so that they have very high ballistic protection, but like their cut protection is much lower, right? Kevlar is less protective against something like an arrow or someone stabbing you than it is against a ballistic, an actual bullet, right? Because I say ballistic, but it's obviously functionally different. Like an arrow is still a ballistic object, but it's not the same kind of damage that you would receive from a 45, right? It's just different. So what I think this is going to lead to is a lot, over time anyway, is a rebalancing of those sort of armors so that they have more realistic protections in the realm of bash and cut, but are still incredibly potent against resisting like a turret shooting you in the chest, right? So I'm very excited to see this. The EOD equipment is still very powerful for what is essentially pretty. I mean, I assume that they're going to be pretty common. The Isapi vest still appears on virtually every soldier, so I gotta imagine that the EOD gear is pretty common as well. Here I've pulled up the gear. Light armored gloves constructed from Kevlar and Nomex for explosive ordnance disposal. They misspelled ordnance, but that's what EOD stands for. I didn't actually know that. Designed to protect against fragmentation and heat. Well, that's cool as well, because it makes me question what, let's say, because the bomb fragments from explosives in the game are extremely potent, and I'm curious how these fare against that. I'm wondering, are those going to be converted to ballistic damage as well, the shrapnel from explosives? Anyway, the gloves and stuff are pretty reasonable values, but once you get to the helmet has pockets. It's not rigid. The volume and stuff increase with contents. What would I be storing in my helmet? Camera, two-way radio, headlamp, all of which can be voiced. That's neat. I like that. Even just for flavor reasons, that's cool. But yeah, some of the gear has pretty low values, but once you get up to the proper jacket, which again, I don't know what it's supposed to be, but in my head I'm picturing the Hurt Locker, of course, very famously had people wandering around in these explosive disposal suits, and then here's a lighter version of that. So they have pretty obscenely high values, but one thing I do think is in their favor is that they're an enormous amount of encumbrance. So unlike the Isapi vest, which is basically just great, and everyone, it's it's always going to be the optimal choice for whatever you have. The Isapi vest is just that bustedly good. These actually have really substantial encumbrance penalties, which makes them much more reasonable. So you see this high tier bash protection, cut protection, and ballistic protection, but you're going to have an 80% reduction to melee, for instance, if you're wearing this on your torso, right? Very, very significant reduction in your capabilities to fight. So, in my opinion, these are already much more balanced than the vests that were added to the game previously, and just the roleplay. It's really cool. I think that they've been added to the game. I think it's really neat. So you'll probably, I don't know where you're going to find these. I guess I can look and see what item groups they added them to. Okay, so doing a little bit of digging here, it looks like EOD armor only currently appears in the Cop Armory item group, so I don't really know where that it is found exactly. I guess it is specifically for the armory in the police station. It's interesting. You would probably expect to find this in the military base at some point. I don't know if the military base pulls from this group ever. I didn't look up this particular group. I don't really want to go down the rabbit hole. Sometimes when you're looking for items in item groups, if you're not a modder or whatever, basically you find an item and you're like, okay, it's in this item group. So you look up that item group and you're like, okay, that item group is the subgroup of this item group. So you look up that item group, which turns out to be a subgroup of another item group. And then you have to look that one up and find what locations spawn it, what monsters spawn it. And it becomes a little bit of a tree that you have to kind of climb to find the results. And I don't really feel like doing all that work. So based solely on the name, I'm going to assume that this appears primarily in police station armories. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm more optimistic about those than I was about the Isapi vest. And I'm super excited to see ballistic damage being calculated separately. This has been a discussion that has been had many times. You know, I've been part of the community, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years at this point. I've seen it come up time and time again. People talk about, well, why do bullets deal cut damage? Well, why isn't it, you know, it's more of an impact, right? It depends on what you're wearing. It's an impact damage, so shouldn't it be blunt? Well, no, really, bullets should be their own thing, and then it becomes a whole discussion. So I'm super excited to see that coming. So good work on those people for doing that work. Then I wanted to touch, it's going to be a long episode. We're getting to touch on Curse Twist working on the mall. So there have been 3 PRs, I believe, that I will be linking in the description down below. We've pulled up 2 of them here. This is just updating the ground floor. If you've, I believe Curse Twist was the one who originally gave the mall its 2nd floor. And honestly, the mall is one of my favorite locations, so that's why I'm talking about this. It's not, from what I've seen, I don't really actually know a lot of what's being done, but I trust Curse Twist, and it's one of my favorite locations. So for me, it's like, well, you got to mention that it's getting a little bit of a facelift. So from what I understand and what I've really been drawn to is that they're getting new shops and some things like that, which is pretty exciting. So I'm pretty thrilled about that. I would love to see, you know, we've talked about, you know, when we talked about merging the game shop, you saw that it was updated to have increased loot density. And one of the things about the ground floor of the mall is that the monster density is out of control high, and the loot density is out of control low compared to even just the 2nd floor of the mall. 2nd floor of the mall, it's flip-flop. There's much more reasonable monster density, and there's much higher loot density. So I'm really hoping that the ground floor of the mall is getting that full rework, because I would love to see some consistency there rather than having them be polar opposites. And I just love the mall. I think it's a great location. It's one of my favorite starting locations, and it's something that I recommend people play if you haven't really been, since it got a 2nd floor and a roof and all that stuff. It's a cool location. So definitely would encourage you to check that out. And then the other one I wanted to point out is that they're being given subway access as well. I don't think this will be in every mall. This is most likely going to be in some malls, because I wouldn't expect every place that there's a mall to have a subway already set up. But then again, maybe that's exactly what this PR did. I really don't know. To me, it just looked like, oh yeah, by the way, some of them are going to have subway access. So I want to mention that. Obviously, you know, Dawn of the Dead, was that 2004 that movie came out? Anyway, they travel through the subway at one point. Or no, it's a sewer system, actually. Never mind, internet. But the mall is getting some work, and I wanted to shout it out because, again, it's one of my favorite locations. Next, from Ember as well, at the zombie. So basically, we've talked about map extras in this series. They're basically just a small bit of, not really map gen, it's more of like monsters and interesting corpses and things like that that spawn out in the world. One of the map extras are the military kind of roadblock areas, which we discussed last week with the spotlights. And so what this PR does is, rather than giving every soldier zombie a rifle, which is what it's been, you know, since the soldier zombies got updated, basically they all have some kind of 223, or, you know, rifle on them at all times. Assault rifles, some of them have light machine guns, etc. That's a little bit much. They were a very reliable place to get Stanag magazines, which is what I've been, you know, using them for primarily, is to get extra Stanag mags. What this does is, instead of giving every soldier zombie a gun at certain, like, map specials, map extras, like the military and roadblocks that spawn zombie soldiers, there will be zombie soldiers there, but instead of them all having rifles and things on them, they will actually spawn on the ground instead. So we actually saw this in one of our recent episodes. Okay, so it took me a while, but here I found it. And we're seeing a military roadblock. Now you'll see there's a APC or something here. There were 2 of the non-lethal turrets. There's a searchlight and all that stuff that we discussed in our previous episode. And you'll see there's quite a lot of zombie soldiers here. Now instead, so basically what this has done is, instead of having every zombie soldier drop an M4 or whatever when you kill them, Instead, whenever they will not have weapon, right? Instead of holding on to the weapons, when these guys get zombified, they drop their guns. So instead of putting it on every zombie that will drop it as a, like when it becomes a corpse, it will generate an M4. Instead of doing that, instead at locations where there would be a military population, such as these roadblocks, spawn the soldier zombies, but put their guns nearby, so that instead of saying, okay, well, they kept holding on to their guns after they died, no, the implication here is that zombies overran this particular barricade, killed all the soldiers. The soldiers died in various locations where they dropped their guns and whatever else they might have been holding on to, and we can see the blood splatter and things to hint at that. And then when they reanimated, they are still here. They're zombie soldiers, right, that we have to deal with, but their guns remained where they were dropped. So instead of finding guns on every single soldier, you're now going to find them more on the ground in locations where there would have been zombies, where there would have been live soldiers at one point. I think that this is an interesting way to handle this. I like it. I think because it will make, one, it will address some balance issues. It will make these guns less common. It will make it less easy to find the Stanag mags, etc. But it also addresses that basically all you had to do was kill a soldier zombie to guarantee that you get an M4 or whatever, or an M1, whatever they are. So I really like this, actually. Now that I'm actually thinking about it, I think this is a really good change. We also experienced, we found a minefield at one point that just had dozens of Stanag mags laying there. I guess that's the same kind of idea, is that, like, you know, they made a stand and used up all their clips and stuff. I kind of like the idea of finding their loot on the ground rather than on their corpses, because it doesn't make sense to me that they would hold on to their guns. What I would like to see is occasionally finding one that has a strap built into it. So like maybe this guy died with his soldier, with his gun over his shoulder, because the implication already is that they're carrying backpacks. So like you might expect to find a sidearm on them occasionally, that kind of thing, because we're still finding that even though they're zombies, they're still holding their backpacks. They still have 3 MREs per person. They're carrying an excavation tool. The gear has not gone anywhere. This is just to address what was in their hands. So I wouldn't hate finding one occasionally with a rifle slung over his shoulder. And I understand the implication is like it would fall off, but I wouldn't mind seeing that. Next, we have the Zombie Kill Station Map Extra from Night. Again, map extras are just things that spawn out in the world, but aren't actually like locations. They're usually small clusters of bodies or furniture or whatever. And this is a really interesting one. I really like the idea of it. Basically, there's a photo. Yes, okay. The gist of this is that there's a big thing that's making noise. So there's a loudspeaker that is set up. And then around that loudspeaker is a trap. So what this does is it draws enemies in with the sound, and it's very loud. It's loudness is 60, which means it can be heard basically as far as reality, which, the reality bubble in the game. So extremely loud and will carry over a very large distance. I mean, not very large, but further than you can see, it will make noise. And it will draw enemies in, of course, because that is exactly what it's designed to do. And then I'm not sure how this deals damage, but what it looks like is like this is supposed to imply that it's a spinning trap. So I think what will happen is once something gets into range with it, it will be dealt damage. I guess we should look at this in the game, huh? Okay, well, I tried to get this to spawn in game. I couldn't actually get it to work. I think what's happening, it says it can only spawn where there's a crossroad with a manhole. So I think I'm just not in the right area to spawn this. But regardless, it seems to deal damage once they move into melee range with it. I don't know what the durability is. I noticed that a lot of the things at the previous barricades and whatnot were not destroyable by zombies. So I gotta assume it's pretty durable. And worst case scenario, this seems like a great way for you to kite enemies and get them killed with this thing. As long as you can kind of remain out of sight and they get drawn by the sound, Seems like a great way to kill a bunch of zombies. I don't know about pulping the bodies. There are definitely corpses there. Okay, come on now. There are definitely corpses here. Oh, they do have... I thought maybe it was going to over-damage them to the point where they're actually pulped, but the little skull indicator here means that they need to be pulped. So I'm not sure how well that will work. I also don't know if it will eventually be destroyed, how the power works, etc. But it's definitely cool. I think it's really neat, and I really like the idea of it. So pretty sick. I like that a lot. And then finally from Korg, we have something that I don't like very much. I gotta be honest with you. We have a new creature called the Necro Boomer. It's more or less what you think it is. It's a boomer that also has the abilities of a zombie necromancer. So the goal here, apparently, is to add scarier enemies for the end game. I think that there's already a lot of difficulty playing in the end game personally, which is why I don't really play the end game very much. But interestingly, when it dies, because it's a boomer, it has very low health, right? When it dies, it revives all zombies and then upgrades all zombies within a radius of 10. So that's actually more than a necromancer, because the necromancer just does one, right? Which one does it do? Does it revive or upgrade? I don't remember. Do they do both? I didn't think they did. Regardless, scary monster, go boom, and then upgrade other monsters. So based on, there's quite a lot of discussion. So I don't even know actually if this is even still accurate, because it looks like there was a lengthy discussion. It's possible that they nerfed this a little bit, but from what I've seen, because I looked at it, it seems scary AF, and I don't really want to interact with it. And to me, yes, it adds challenge, yes, it makes things difficult, but it just feels like it just feels kind of unfair. It doesn't feel like it's difficult because I have a special mechanic to surmount or there's like work involved in it. It feels difficult for the sake of being difficult. Does that make sense? So looking at this thing, I don't like it, and it feels way OP because it's already very difficult to deal with upgraded monsters. But I will say that by the time you start seeing it, to my understanding, most things will be pretty heavily upgraded anyway. So I don't think the upgrading is the issue. I think the issue is reviving and upgrading. So like if we prioritize killing this first, it's going to upgrade everything when it dies, right? We don't want that. So instead of fighting this first, we will prioritize killing the enemies around it and trying to stay away from it so it doesn't boomer. If we can do that and kill all the enemies nearby, great. Maybe we can pulp them before it can revive them, before it blows up and revives them. Maybe you can do that. But ultimately, it feels like trying to kill things that are already pretty upgraded. I don't know how to say it. It just feels not great. It feels not great. I don't love this zombie, and I just don't like it. So, no disrespect. I just don't like it very much. But then again, I don't really play in the late game, so I usually get bored and walk away way before I'll start seeing things like this. Worst case scenario, it's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting concept. I just think it's too much personally. But anyway, yeah, so I think that's going to do it for this particular episode. It ran way long, and I only have about 27 cuts to make, so very exciting, lots of fun. Hopefully you've enjoyed the episode. If you did, maybe consider clicking the like button. It's one of the only things you can do as a viewer that actually really helps put the video out there. Of course, you could advertise for me as well. Tell your friends, hey, some idiot talks about the development of this little zombie game that's way too good. Yeah, that's gonna be a wrap for this episode. So for now, thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. I'll be back with more in the near future. I'll see you next time.